bringing attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Hi everyone, this is Andy Steele. Thanks again for listening. This week the interview is with Bruce Stahlberg. He's a 9/11 truth activist from Minnesota, and we'll be hearing about some of the things he's done and some of the situations he's had to deal with in getting the word out over the years where he lives. This is a good interview to listen to if you're someone who wants to do something locally but you don't know where you can start. So stay tuned for that. I'll be playing that very shortly. First, I want to get to some news. If you go to ae911truth.org this week, we have this article. Divided Federal Appeals Court panel rules. Negligence did not cause Building 7's collapse. Dissenting judge asks, what did? And this was published on December 26th. It was written by Dennis McMahon and Greg Roberts. And the beginning of the article reads, in a 2-to-1 split decision, a federal appeals court panel in the Second Circuit ruled that negligence didn't cause the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11, 2001. In his dissenting opinion, Circuit Court Judge Richard Wesley stated, one would think that, on this record, the majority would want to hear from defendants' experts on why World Trade Center 7 collapsed. The lawsuit involved an action brought by Con Ed, a New York City power utility company that, along with its insurers, sued the defendants. Those defendants are 7 World Trade Center Company, LP, Silverstein Development Corp., and Silverstein Properties Incorporated, who designed, built, operated, and maintained Building 7. The plaintiffs alleged that the defendants' negligence had caused Building 7 to collapse, thereby destroying the electrical substation owned by Con Ed directly underneath the building. The Second Circuit panel affirmed Hellerstein's decision, quote, on the alternative ground that even assuming negligence on the part of the defendants, any such negligence was not the cause, in fact, of the collapse of 7 World Trade Center, end quote. Implausibly, the panel majority, quote-unquote, reasoned that, quote, it is simply incompatible with common sense and experience to hold that defendants were required to design and construct a building that would survive the events of September 11th, 2001, end quote. And the article goes on to say that amidst all this, the panel got some things wrong. Apparently it was unaware that the Twin Towers were built to withstand the jetliner impacts and the fires that resulted from those impacts. It also claimed that there wasn't enough water to fight the fire that morning, when in reality there was a lot of water from the Hudson River that was used that morning to fight the fires. Judge Richard Wesley, he was the dissenting voice, like I said, and here was his dissent. I'm going to read it to you verbatim. It says, plaintiffs' experts have articulated a standard of care. High-rise buildings must be built to withstand a fire that cannot be extinguished by the efforts of firefighters. Plaintiffs' experts have also identified a deviation from that standard. The building was designed and erected in such a way that it was subject to failure if a fire broke out that could not be quelled. They have tied that standard and its deviation to the injury for which they seek recompense. Lastly, plaintiffs' experts have offered opinions that 7 World Trade Center did not collapse as a result of structural damage from falling debris. One would think that, on this record, the majority would want to hear from defendants' experts on why World Trade Center 7 collapsed. It may well be that causation, be it proximate or in fact, can be decided as a matter of law in the district court after a careful review of all expert submissions, or that a trial will result in a defendant's verdict, but that is not the path the majority has chosen for this case. I would remand the matter to the district court for trial. I, therefore, respectfully dissent. So there you are, folks, another case showing that blind justice is an ideal but not a reality when it comes to 9/11. Of course, in a critical, dispassionate analysis of the situation, the panel would have considered the controlled demolition evidence, since controlled demolition is not only what possibly happened to Building 7, it's the most likely possibility. I mean, it is what happened, folks. but for all the reasons that we talk about on this show, psychological, political, it's business as usual in the American justice system. I got another story. I really like this one. Educating the public about the World Trade Center evidence on a paper-thin budget. This was written by AE 9/11 Truth staff, and it says, to support the Rethink 9/11 campaign inexpensively, activists in Connecticut took a novel approach to doing outreach by creating homemade Rethink 9/11 banners. Local organizer Wayne Costi said that one of the issues when doing outreach is how many people will see the message and how much effort it will take. Our group did not have the funds for paid advertising, so we decided to try a homemade traveling billboard. Furthermore, it could be made to be fun, and that is a definite bonus. Co-organizer Carl Henry Seeger said, one of our members was able to print off a series of 11 by 17 color segments that could be taped together into a double-sided banner. And the article goes on and talks about how they used the banner also at the Riverfest event, in which Wayne Costi and others rode around on a boat with the banner waving. I've talked about that before. They used it at a parade as well. But what I like about this is that these activists are problem solvers. All right, they didn't have money for a billboard, so they made their own out of paper. Yeah, it was a little more work, and that's what happens when you don't have money. You just got to work harder to reach your goals. But they got it done. And that's what it takes, folks. And I want to highlight this story because it drives me nuts when people give up at the slightest obstacle or when the simplest, most ideal solution is out of their reach. All right, most success is not as a result of some clever realization or idea. It helps, but it's not just the idea that makes success happen. All right, most success is just doing the work and making the mistakes and repeating it and improving it. It's that simple. Either you want it bad or you don't. But you don't just stop because maybe you're not a pro at something yet or because it's not the most perfect scenario being laid out before you. You're never going to have the most perfect scenario. That's not how life is designed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this problem to begin with. All right, the most important thing to do is engage the problem. You create that resistance any way you can, even if it seems small at first, and even if you got to use the most bare bones tools available to you. I mean, sure, if you have better resources available and it's possible to use them, go for it. But if you don't, that's not an excuse. And with regard to the situation being hard and seeming too big, hey, that's just how it is. All right, if you were an engineer on a spaceship and you were in orbit or on the moon, and when the time came to return to Earth and your rocket suddenly didn't work, what would you do? You've got a limited amount of oxygen stored. Would you waste that oxygen crying about how unfair and scary the situation is? Or would you try to fix the rocket? All right, if you're going to go down, at least go down with a fight. You know, I remember from kidhood, I had a comic book. It was Daredevil, and he was fighting the Submariner. And the Submariner was the bad guy. He had superhuman strength and superhuman agility. Daredevil was the good guy. He had normal person strength and normal person agility. And at the end of the whole adventure, Daredevil gets overwhelmed and beaten up pretty bad by the Submariner, and he's defeated. But as the Submariner's walking away, Daredevil reaches up and weakly grabs the back of the Submariner's ankle. You know, just laying there on the ground, he grabs his ankle from behind, and you know he's just refusing to give up. And the Submariner is so impressed by this mere mortal's will that he has a new respect for humans, and he decides not to attack the world, and he returns to the ocean. So the moral of the story is Daredevil still saves the day just by not giving up. Now you may think that it's silly for me to cite a comic book as an example here on this show, but that's a perfect allegory for what often happens. All right, people on the outside see activists passionate and resolved and waking up the public. They get impressed and they respect that. And they get curious and they come into the circle to see what it's about. And if you get them to listen to at least one of the experts from Experts Speak Out, or to watch the whole movie, or listen to one of the interviews on this show, then you've planted a seed. And those seeds will sprout later, as we talk about all the time on this show. People will start coming on board. I've got a perfect example here. I'm going to play you a clip from C-SPAN's Washington Journal. This was on Christmas morning of this year. The open phones topic that morning, they were inviting callers to call in and talk about who is your political hero of 2013. So I'm going to play that right now.
Definitely like that. And I think it's a way the country should go.
Bill, thanks for calling from Cleveland, Ohio this morning to talk about your political hero for 2013. Jessica's up next from Wentzville, Missouri, on our line for Republicans. Jessica, good morning.
Hi, how are you this morning?
Good.
Merry Christmas. Good. Well, I had two heroes. I chose Rand Paul because of his emphasis on civil liberties. And for the same reason, I love all the 9/11 conspiracy callers on your show.
And talk a little bit about an either and why you're electing them as your hero for 2013.
Both because of the civil liberties aspect, and I feel like the 9/11 guys, even though it's an unpopular message, they are drawing attention to how that was kind of a crystal knocked event for our country, so they could remove some of our rights. You know, that's why I am such a strong Republican libertarian slant.
All right, Jessica, thanks for calling in this Christmas morning. We're going to be taking your comments in. Much more on that in the days, weeks, and months to come. But as we said, we're talking about your political hero of 2013. Todd is from Davenport, Iowa, on our line for Independence. Todd, good morning.
Good morning, yes. And I'm surprised you guys were live today. Thank you for being on. I wake up every morning to C-SPAN. I'm an independent newspaper publisher out of Davenport, Iowa. And
Appreciate you tuning in.
Pardon me?
Appreciate you tuning in. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning, has to be on the list, I think, for 2013. And Thomas Drake, the whistleblower from the NSA, also should be on the list for 2013. I first became aware of Thomas Drake actually watching C-SPAN, your coverage of the National Press Club in June, when he made a phenomenal speech, which I encourage everybody to go to your video archives and search for Thomas Drake at the National Press Club. It's a very gripping, chilling survey of what the situation is. And you know, before Snowden, there was Drake, and Snowden gets all the headlines, but Drake is the one that inspired Snowden, and Drake exposed the NSA's Trailblazer program, and he did, you know, as Senator Feinstein has implored whistleblowers to go through channels, official channels. He did try to report the misconduct he blew the whistle on through official channels, and you know, to no avail. So I think Thomas Drake should be on the list, and of course Chelsea Manning. And I'm hopeful that in our lifetime that Manning will see the light of day and freedom. And one other comment I'd like to make is, and your second caller this morning, the woman who broached the topic of the conspiracy theorists who call in, I applaud her bringing that up. I know that you, many of your folks that host these shows are sensitive to people calling in about that topic, and I would really encourage your producers to think about having the architects and engineers for truth on as guests regarding the facts that they have looked up and so forth. And I think it's a topic that should be discussed, and I would encourage people to check out the Architects and Engineers for Truth. That is an extremely empirical, cogent, and balanced view that you probably won't hear.
Todd, thanks for the suggestions this morning. Todd brings up the Whistleblowers event.
So there you are, folks, and the people calling in about Building 7 are not the only folks calling in and questioning 9/11 recently on that show. A lot of folks, just off the cuff, you know, off the end of their other questions and from different angles about 9/11, they're doing it on an escalated basis now. And there's always been folks calling in and doing that over the years, but it's increasing now. It's happening more often. And that's a good thing, and we got to keep it up. You just pick up the phone, call in, and, you know, wait for a congressman to be on or one of these kingmakers in the media and let them know that this issue is not going to go away. The American people are not going to just pick up and move on because the establishment has decided that they've used 9/11 for all it's worth. I don't think they have used it for all it's worth, but they are telling people to forget about it, to move on, to get on with your lives. But we are not. We're going to keep on reminding them. We're going to keep calling in. We're going to keep on being America's conscience. Okay, what we're going to do now is what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Stahlberg is a 9/11 Truth activist from Minnesota. He's been very proactive over the years in getting the message out, including holding 9/11 Truth movie screenings in his area and bringing speakers to where he lives over there in Minnesota. We'll be talking about how to do that today with him and all of the great stuff that he's done with his group, Minnesota 9/11 Truth. Welcome, Bruce.
Welcome, thank you.
So, Bruce, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and your background. You know, who are you? How did you wake up to the evidence, and what prompted you to take action?
Okay, well, you know, I'd like to say I'm just a citizen, but you should never say you're just a citizen, right? Because we all are citizens of this country, and like a lot of people on September 11th, I sat and watched, kind of in shock and awe, right? Very, very surprised by the things that were unfolding on the TV in front of my eyes, and quite frankly didn't give it very much thought. Just kind of listened and said, okay, I guess this is what had happened. On July 12th, 2006, I was sitting in a coffee shop, and another citizen was going to show a film, and I'd sort of heard about what it was about. It was, you know, questioning the official story, and I was kind of taken aback, to be honest. I was a little bit mad, and, you know, like, how dare they question? But I felt like, well, what I can do is I'll stay and watch it, and I can ask some tough questions and, you know, kind of put them on the spot, I guess. And that's when I had seen World Trade Center number 7, which is a building that was shown on September 11th, but if you weren't watching the entire day, you might not have caught it. It wasn't shown very often. And I guess if someone's listening to this and they've never seen that building fall, it's kind of like watching the video is an important aspect, because it really comes straight down. It's sort of a phenomenal effect. And so in this coffee shop, I sort of sat there and I went, oh my, what is that? I didn't even know what it was about. So then I had to kind of regroup and thought, well, I'll go do a little more research and try to get to the bottom of this. And the more you scrutinize it, you start to realize that what we were told and how the investigation actually happened are really, they don't pass the standards. They weren't following standard protocol, and really it's a very low probability of having the correct answer. So low, in fact, that there are over 2,000 architects and engineers who say it's not possible. I usually try to tell people to be a little bit more sort of like, hey, let's take a look and see, and you can decide for yourself. But that's a pretty powerful statement from 2,000 architects and engineers. So that was sort of my turnaround time. I did find out that there are others working in the state as well. And I think that's true all over the nation. There are people that have taken a second look at it, at the events, and really, you know, I think one way to believe the official conclusion is to really not ever look at it, not scrutinize it at all. Otherwise, there are a lot of questions that have not been answered. So.
Right, and I appreciate you mentioning Building 7 and imploring the listeners to go view it. I like to treat each episode, if at all possible, like it's the first episode anyone's ever heard. And obviously, if somebody listens to the show regularly, they know about Building 7, they know about architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and they probably got a pretty good grip on the evidence. But there's always those new people, and seeing is believing. You know, I think a lot of people might shy away from arguing about this topic with others because they think, well, I'm not an engineer, I don't have any special training, I don't know how buildings are constructed. But if you actually watch Building 7 fall for the 6.5 seconds that it takes for this building to come straight down, just like Bruce said here, your common sense should kick in, and you should realize that fire has never caused a steel frame high-rise to do that before or after 9/11, a fact that we keep on driving home here on this show. So, you know, I've famously said it on my local news, if you have two eyes and common sense, you'll know that fire alone didn't bring down that building. And that is the first step towards a long journey, not just in 9/11 Truth, but several other issues for people to wake up to on what is going on in this world. But 9/11 Truth is at the basis of all of it. So it sounds to me like the Building 7 was probably the biggest smoking gun for you to make you wake up and start questioning this event. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it really was because, I mean, the other two buildings had been hit by airplanes. You know, I think anybody can probably close their eyes and see those planes still, to this day. They were shown over and over. And so, this big violent explosion, and, and then about an hour later, one of them starts to collapse completely. And I didn't really scrutinize that. But this third building was about 300 feet away. There was another building in between it, number 6, and that did not collapse. Heavily damaged, but didn't collapse. This building completely collapses, and I kind of want to say that I think it's more the lack of transparency is really sort of something that is kind of a flag for me, because when you're doing scientific discovery or you're doing investigations, there are standard protocols, and when you don't follow those, then you kind of wonder, well, why wasn't that? So that I found to be fairly strange as well. We also found out that they did not look for explosives. Any building that burns, there's a fire investigation protocol, and one of the first things they do is look for accelerants, trying to determine if that building had been intentionally burned. They also have a definition for explosions. What makes a definition, and so those things were not looked at because it didn't seem to fit what they were looking for in terms of a predetermined outcome. And with any investigation, the worst way to make that investigation inaccurate is to determine what it is before you actually do the investigation work. So I really want citizens to kind of understand that I may not, we don't know exactly what happened, but we were told something that didn't follow standard protocol, didn't include all the evidence, and came up with a conclusion that has an extremely, extremely, extremely low probability of being the correct answer. And since, we did invade a couple countries and, have spent trillions of dollars, changed our constitution, it's really important that we do this in the correct manner and then find out what happened and who did it. You also can't determine, motives or who might be responsible until you figure out what exactly happened in the first place.
Exactly, and I've used the analogy here on this show before of getting a gift and trying to fit it into a box that's way too small for it. So what do? You mutilate the gift. If it's a doll, you cut the arms off and the legs off, and what you end up with is something that isn't quite a doll in the end. Well, in this case, we've mutilated this narrative, and it doesn't make any sense, but they're trying to fit it into this predetermined box. And I think that the American public over the past many decades has been conditioned to think that there's somebody looking out for them. That, of course, it's 9/11. Of course, they would have looked into every single aspect of it. Of course, they would have used the scientific method and determined whether or not there were explosives involved, obviously, because this is 9/11. So people have deferred their own responsibility. And it's understandable to an extent because, again, not everybody is a scientist, not everybody is an architect or an engineer. But what you cited earlier, the lack of transparency is so glaring when basic common sense tells you that no, fire couldn't have caused the building to do that. Then it's time to start speaking up and pushing back. And that's what people like you are doing, and all of the activists that we interview on this show every week. It's people pushing back, speaking out, and saying, I don't care what you're telling me. I have common sense. I have two eyes. I know the scientific method, and you are not telling me the truth. We know that explosives brought that down. Who was behind it? There's varying opinions, very well-educated opinions on it, but what we can all agree on is the science and the facts. And again, 105 feet of free fall in Building 7, meaning you have to erase 8 stories from the building. That doesn't make sense from the NIST's official explanation. Now, we mentioned earlier...
Add one more thing on that. If you look at controlled demolition, right, something that, in other words, we would know that it was going to happen, bombs have to be placed strategically into buildings, into the infrastructure. That is something that, takes a long time to do. There's not that many companies that do it. But if you look at all of the evidence that happened that day, and that would be things like free fall, secondary explosions, pyroclastic explosions, pulverized concrete, systematic falling into its own footprint. And another thing, all of the announcers actually, on that day, as Building 7 was falling down, they all said it looked like a controlled demolition. So one thing, if you were on an investigation, committee or a commission, is you would at least use that and say, well, that's a possibility, right? We don't really know how that may have happened, but it would be a possible theory. And it wasn't considered because it really didn't fit. How would 19 hijackers, we'd have to ask them, or the security people, how did they get into the buildings, to the inner depths of these buildings months in advance? So it really is a sort of a tough implication to go ahead and assume that. And so in this case, that was not considered, although you have eyewitnesses, hearing secondary explosions. There's a number of reasons why you would at least include it as a possible theory to be disproven.
Exactly, and I'd love if I had a time machine to go back in time and take a lot of these pundits that will, refuse to look into the controlled demolition evidence now, and newspaper people, pluck them from that day and put them in a room with the persons or people that they are now, and kind of keep them separated, but ask them, show them that building falling and ask them what their opinion is on the possibility of it being a controlled demolition versus now, and see what kind of answer you give or that you get, and see what their instant gut reaction is to watching that building fall. And I guarantee you'll get a lot of different responses, because on that day, people hadn't been given the word, the new social peer pressure hadn't set in yet to say, oh, well, if you want to keep on practicing your career, if you want to stay relevant and stay in the in crowd and keep making your paycheck, you don't talk about this. That hadn't set in that day, so you get a lot of honest responses from people on the very day that something happens like that. Like Dan Rather saying it looks like I'm paraphrasing, but saying it looks just like a controlled demolition. Now I want to make sure we talk about Minnesota 9/11 Truth here. What is it? Tell our audience about this group and what you guys do.
Well, I think it's not much different than all across the nation. There are citizens like ourselves, and again, it's we're a group of very committed citizens. I'm just one of many, and statewide. We're in the metro area, but statewide there are people all over, and I think that's true of the nation. I know Colorado has a really great group and done a lot of things, and so we sort of have modeled ourselves off of that, saying, this is important, and so we do have to have a voice. So we hold events. We do a number of different things, actions, trying to educate people, and mainly that is because the media, and we'll get to that a little later, but the media has done a really bad job of educating, and so we feel like we are the citizens that will try to inform, even though that's what the media is supposed to do. So we have done a number of events, quite a few. So back, we showed Press for Truth, 9/11 Press for Truth. We had about 700 people. We had to turn people away. That was kind of a highlight. Fox News, the local Fox News actually came and covered that story. We brought in Willie Rodriguez, who was one of the last people in the World Trade Center buildings, or had keys from when the attack had done before. So he'd been a janitor in the building for over 20 years. Talked about things that didn't follow with the official story. Hearing explosions down in the lower level. There's 8 floors in the basement. So we brought him in for, and then that way people can ask questions directly. We bring in any citizen is, allowed or encouraged to come and hear him speak. Loose Change is another film that was sort of an internet sensation, kind of got a lot of people opened up to this idea. We brought in the directors from Chicago, had about 500 people there. We've shown Blueprint for Truth kind of repeatedly. let's see, we did have a local kind of, what do you call them, the Independent Art Film Society here. We rented a theater from them, and we had a contract for them to do 3 different types of advertising for us, and one was to send out an email notice to all of their viewers or their members. That was our biggest thing. We were like, that's great. They were supposed to put it up on the marquee and then also put it on their electronic calendar. And as it turns out, they didn't do any one of those 3 things. So we were kind of disappointed. It wasn't very well attended, but...
wait a second. You had a contract with them. Did they give you any kind of apology or refund or anything like that for failing to meet their obligations?
Yeah, it's great. So I went in there afterwards, and another one of our members had done it, and I never actually got the contract. But I asked them. I said, well, and I had called them before about putting it on the calendar, which is, you'd have to go to their website and see that. And those are the types of things, they don't take very long to do. Sending out a mass email to your membership is not a large amount of labor. So I asked him, I said, how come you didn't do those things? And he said, well, I tell you what, he said, I can give you $25 off. And I said, well, if it's only $25, it wouldn't have taken it's obviously not much labor, and so I don't understand why you wouldn't have done it. I said, the $25 doesn't mean anything to us. What we wanted is to have people, be able to see these things. So then he offered that we could do another night, and I was like, okay, I'm interested in that. And then he said, but we'd have to pay the full price again. So I'm not paranoid about all this stuff. I just sort of kind of don't understand why they wouldn't want to share that with their membership. Their membership are basically people that go to documentaries, are open-minded to looking at things, even critical documentaries. So I think what happens is you can get a person whose fears, and there's a lot of emotional and fear about this topic, actually looking at it, and if the person that has basically the power, whether that be an editor at a newspaper or a television station, or even in this case, a small independent art film society, then they have the power to kind of do those things and really kind of restrict it. If you have someone that's more open-minded to it, you have more of a chance of doing that. But they do so at a bit of a risk because it's not very favorable or popular, I should say. I want to say one other thing. You have about 2,100 architects and engineers, professionals in all these different capacities, skyrise architects, all these things. And they have gone out publicly and signed a petition saying that it's not possible, right, the official version. That's not really a career move, And so you have to wonder if it was more accepted to scrutinize that, how many more people would do that. So I think that's a lot of credibility. And I'd put in a plug for Experts Speak Out. If anyone wants to watch any particular film, there's about 43 of these petition signers, and they're really very credible. They have nothing to gain at all, and even something to lose. And so I think there's a ton of credibility with them. We did also have a film festival where we showed 8 different films throughout the course of a day. It was pretty busy. Lots of volunteers headed by one of our members did a great job. Put it all together, lining up venues and showing them throughout the course of the day. We had David Ray Griffin, who's a really well-known author, come in. And the title of his speech was, "Are the Wars in Afghanistan Justified by 9/11?" That was held at a church. And we often work a lot of different festivals with booths, have flyers up encouraging people just to talk to them, just get out citizen to citizen. We showed, Blueprint for Truth on September 11th, 2010. That was sponsored by a family of somebody here whose sister was killed in the Pentagon. And they actually flew their family out a month afterwards out to the Pentagon, and so she has some interesting stories about that experience. And let's see, we've done something at Metro State University. A little interesting news on that one is they weren't very interested in doing the advertising for us, and so I had to call the president and I said, well, is this sounds like a little bit of a restriction on academic freedom, and so then they kind of went ahead and did their advertising that they said they would do. Let's see here. Well, we had Richard Gage out at the University of Minnesota. We actually tried to change our venues around, just hoping that the media would catch them. So this same venue that we did, folks like Walter Mondale spoke at right around the same time, so it's like really a prestigious venue, open-minded university type setting. We still didn't get very much publicity at all from the mainstream media. About 350 people or so. Just on a side note on that, 69 people were kind of unsure before they saw that presentation, and afterwards 68 had changed their mind. So the evidence can be pretty powerful. And so I could go on and on. There's quite a few things that we've done, but we're always trying to get people just to kind of look at this. And I think if you talk to people about, say, Building 7, for example, a lot more people are aware of this issue now. It isn't covered in the news, and now we're looking at, 13 years later, coming up this year. So it's not really a conversation that happens around the water cooler or anything like that. But I think it is a conversation that does need to take place, and I don't think it's a good idea to kind of force it on anybody, but just to kind of have them, respectfully take a look. There were a lot of people, our fellow citizens, who were killed that day, blown up in buildings that appears to be intentional. And many of those bodies have not been identified. The bodies have been exploded. Some of the bone fragments were a centimeter long and found on tops of buildings in the surrounding areas, and they are still not identified. So these are our fellow citizens. It is our responsibility of our country to do the investigation and to do it properly. And so I can't tell you exactly what happened, who did it, or anything like that, or why. I can just say very safely that the investigation was not transparent, was not the standard protocol. Very simple stuff.
And I listened to you, and you've listed all of the things that you guys have been doing over the years, and these are things that our audience can do. These are examples, things that people can emulate, and there's different processes for doing different things, marching in parades, renting theaters, all of that. I just want to give a quick side note. I guess I'm kind of hung up on this whole theater thing. It just seems like a tremendous injustice, and I just create another scenario in my head. What if there was a similar situation, if it was a gay rights group wanting to show a movie and had made this agreement with some theater manager, and then the manager had his own personal principles or religious ideas and decided to do the same thing with the gay rights group, I think the reaction would be a lot different. I think the media would react a lot differently. And I've said it before in this show, as with 9/11 Truth, it's the only topic that the machine feels it's okay to discriminate on, that it feels that it's okay to be bigoted on, where somebody can get away with something like this, and nobody's going to check them on it, except for people within the movement. And I think that should be illustrated. I think that should, that particular story should show the situation that people like you have been battling for years, and the tremendous progress that we've made, because we've gone from that now to having billboards in New York City and taxi top ads and subways and people from the inside helping out and getting that out, and even on with C-SPAN, with all the people calling in, that there's more and more of them doing it. People who don't even talk about the controlled demolition evidence, but just give their own opinions on 9/11 and who they think was involved with it, and backing the 9/11 controlled demolition callers up. So we've gone a long way, and I think it's a testament to people like you, who just keep on punching, who keep on battling and not giving up, and you can begin to win over everybody just through sheer determination and not backing down. And you don't force it on them, but you don't silence yourself either. You have those loud conversations, and you keep on talking about it regardless of what the machine tries to do to use the mass peer pressure to silence you. So I think that's remarkable, not just for you, but for everybody. Now, have you noticed this? Because I just talked about my own observations over the years of how the message and how people's response to the message has changed. Have you noticed this kind of change yourself, or do you think that I'm way off? How receptive do you think people are now compared to when you first started?
Yeah, that's a good question. It does vary a lot. And there's a lot of different, I don't know how to say it, but like perspectives on this, where, I have some very good friends who are pretty open-minded, very well-read, but two of them in particular they really will not have this conversation. Others, and so across the board, you can really run into people that say, wow, no, I'd never heard about that. Sure, of course I would take a look. And I kind of want to emphasize that really what we're asking is just a conversation which is totally protected under the First Amendment right. Again, not telling anybody, just trying to inform people to take a look at these things. And I think what has happened is that has happened more and more, even though it's not encouraged, right? And so maybe people might not talk about it as much. But I think what happened is there is an erosion of confidence, which is very dangerous for a country, right? We don't now trust that the government will do an investigation correctly. We don't trust that the media will actually inform us about these topics. And that is sort of the bottom, that's a real base of our democracy, and that's a real problem because there is, I think that confidence is really low. And it's not just, mainstream media like, your big CNN, ABC, and those types, but even here, like the Film Society that I told you about, which basically encourages critical thought. Minnesota Public Radio has not been very forthright at all. On the 10th anniversary, they had all the people that were as part of the official, version, people that were on the 9/11 Commission report. They didn't have anybody, say Richard Gage's or David Ray Griffin. TPT is the public television station here. You probably know that Experts Speak Out went to #1 in the nation as the most watched on public television. Yet our public television station still would not acknowledge that or show it. And so I think it's going to have to come from the people, and I think more and more there are people. Actually, interesting note, Minnesota Public Radio had a story on conspiracy theorists, right? And it was basically why do conspiracy theorists think like that, right? And it was pretty detrimental. It was they didn't want anyone to call in and talk about specifics or any evidence or anything like that. And I really found it to be kind of curious because they kept saying that they were open-minded to the whole thing, but then they really would categorize and box people in as conspiracy theorists, which is a really great way to stifle the conversation. Because if you're a conspiracy theorist, there's a lot of emotion in that label. You are basically determined to be crazy, and then you don't have to really listen to anyone anymore. And so if you're listening out there today, I would just ask that if someone ever mentions these things to you, you just have an open mind and just listen to what they have to say. You can watch a 5-minute video, rethink 9/11. Rethink911.org. So that's rethink911.org. 5-minute video is very powerful. And so we know that people don't have a lot of time. We can work the rest of our lives paying for the wars, but we don't have, 2 hours to watch this. So it's been boiled down. I want to put a plug in for another short video, if you're unfamiliar with this, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, and Eric Lawyer, just like an attorney, Lawyer, does an 8-minute press conference talking about fire investigation protocol. So really powerful things that you can get a real good handle on what we're talking about in basically under a half an hour. So getting back to your question, I kind of got off track a little bit there, but I do think that people are for the most part pretty open about this. You will always have those that have a fear that they can't get over, and I don't know if there's any changing that, or I don't know how to change that.
Right, and you talk about how they use that term conspiracy theorist. That's done to put you on the defensive immediately and justify why you're not crazy, instead of starting in a neutral standing point and just looking at the evidence for what it is, so that they can act like they're above you, because they really can't argue with it. Because most of the times the reporters themselves don't really have any grasp on the issue, and so they just defer to the judgment of National Institute of Standards and Technology and just sit back and laugh at you, and they think that they can control public perception by doing that, and at one point they could. That's why we've been fighting such an uphill struggle all of these years, but now that's starting to diminish, and they are themselves starting to cut their own throats and lose relevance, because people see it for what it is. It's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you start to see the media manipulation, you can't stop seeing it each time it happens, not just with 9/11 Truth, but other issues as well. So I think they're getting desperate now, and in many cases, you can see that in some spheres, some areas, certain reporters are starting to not maybe necessarily embrace it, but to not put that conspiracy theory label on people who talk about it.
That's a great segue to that. Seymour Hersh, one of our top journalists, investigative journalist, here's a quote that he recently said. He said that Hersh went on to harshly criticize his long-term employer, the New York Times, and other big media outlets. We lie about everything. Lying has become the staple. He said all big U.S. media outlets should be shut down for lying to the American people. Now, this is a guy whose entire career has been in doing investigative journalism, a lot of credibility, and he's actually criticizing his employer, which, is not usually something you do if you're, it's not very favorable. So, again, he has nothing to gain from this. Recently, I watched something from the New York Times, and it was a guy in an interview, and he said that we have not found any evidence of controlled demolition in the World Trade Center buildings. And there is tons of evidence that's contrary to that. And so, again, if you're listening, just go out and take a quick look at some of these short films, see if what the New York Times is saying, if that's true or not. If there isn't evidence that would make us want to look at controlled demolition.
Right, that was David Sanger from the New York Times. It was on Washington Journal, and he says we haven't found any evidence because they're not looking for it. He also claims that they've had repeated coverage of it. I've looked at their articles over the years about Building 7, and whenever they get to, even if they do get to people who talk about controlled demolition, they do it with that same kind of stick your tongue out, conspiracy theorist labeling, just snotty toned coverage that we talk about all the time. We talked about earlier in this show. That's not balanced coverage. That's not fair coverage. If it was fair coverage, they would lay out the evidence and let the people, the readers, decide for themselves. So if they want to claim that they've covered this, they haven't really covered this, not seriously covered it.
Let me just say one thing to the people listening too, is all of us have a lot of personal credibility. So, certainly I can be labeled, I've been called many things, crazy and else worse. But at the end of the day, I do have personal credibility with people in my life. And that I would encourage people to use, saying that it's very important. I really would like you, I'd really like you to take a look at this, whether it be, your wife or your husband or friends, family members. Face-to-face, is often a lot better. You can send out mass emails. It's quite easy to ignore this topic. So really having conversations face-to-face and just using your personal credibility, saying it's very important to me that you just take a look at this. I'm not telling you what to think. I wouldn't, don't let me tell you what to think. Don't let a government investigation tell you what to think. Use your own common sense.
Right, and it's funny when you start talking about this openly and not acting like you're timid about it, not qualifying the question before by saying, "Oh, don't think I'm crazy," or "Don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist." Just say it. Just say what you think. You'll be amazed how many people agree with you. There was a guy, I won't say his name or anything, but he's an engineer, and somehow it came out in conversation. I had to do something for AE 9/11 Truth, and he asked me, what my group is, because I just said it as my group. And I told him what it was about, and it was almost like he finished my sentence, and he went on and took the narrative himself and started going into how impossible the explanation is, and how he was ashamed that he had never seen Building 7 before or falling before, and thought about that, and he himself on his own, without me even talking to him prior to this, had already come to this conclusion that it was a controlled demolition. He hadn't even heard of AE 9/11 Truth, or at least known about it as an entity. He obviously must have come across some videos on YouTube or something, but he had not even heard of AE 9/11 Truth, and he himself had already come to this conclusion, and he was going to go ahead and sign the petition after I told him about it. So you have no idea, if you just speak out and you just talk about it, how many people are really on your side. They just may not come out of the woodwork until you sort of draw them out by being unafraid of speaking your own mind on it. Now, with other groups that are out there, because there are other issues that are related to 9/11. They spun off from 9/11. The NSA is the first one that comes to my mind right now with the surveillance. What kind of groups, in your opinion, should 9/11 Truth be aligning with? And what I mean by that is, not taking our own focus off of Building 7 and the hard scientific evidence, but groups that if they're having a convention, they may let us have a table down there because it's related to their issue.
Well, I think certainly peace groups. This was the justification to invade two sovereign nations, and so if we don't want to go to war anymore, we should, prevent that. Not all peace groups are open to the conversation. We've had quite a good luck by nurturing relationships over time, and again, that sort of comes down to that sort of perseverance and sincerity of just saying, just take a look at this, please, and that's all we're asking you to do. So we've gotten some routes there. I know Richard Gage has been in the architects conferences. They might not be as open to it, but if you are an architect, you can certainly have a booth there. And some folks don't want to mix their beliefs in this with their professional lives, just for fear of retaliation, I guess. And we try to reach out to various types of groups, and they don't necessarily have to. This isn't liberal or conservative. It's not Democrat or Republican. We have spent a lot of money, so budget-wise, if you're conservative, it's conservative fiscal. We got to spend the money the right way. We have a lot of needs in this country, and so really, you can kind of go to a lot of different groups, and what we're saying is that you have the conversation, and you will probably be surprised at how well received it can be. Not always, and we tend to remember the people that called us a really nasty name. I guess I don't know why we remember them, but that must be human nature. But in the meantime, you'll have 20 conversations with people that are very open-minded and very willing to take a look. Churches are a good one. A lot of people are members of church, of a congregation, and if you take a look at this and you have some questions in your own mind, you can really easily grab a projector, a white wall, or a screen, throw some speakers on there, show a film, and open it up for discussion to others. That's a great way, I think, to do it, because churches are often in search of, truth and justice, many of the churches. And so and if you're a member of the congregation, it seems like then you can have that conversation with the rest of the membership.
Right. I recommend everybody go out and buy a projector. I have one. They're really great for showing movies in large groups, and also just for watching your own action and sci-fi movies during your downtime at home. But, you talk about going into churches and all these different groups. What about politics? In your opinion, for instance, like running someone for office just based on the issue of 9/11 Truth and it being a single issue candidacy to raise awareness, is that something that 9/11 Truth should be getting involved in or staying away from?
Well, that's a good one. I mean, I can't imagine either of the top two parties would be supportive of that. I'm going to say one of the things I should mention. Veterans for Peace national group. They have this on their platform. So if so veterans who have been over and fought wars, they have 9/11 Truth as part of their platform from their 2009 conference. So veterans groups also could be another organization that you can toy up with. As far as it's nice. You might know that we had Jesse Ventura as a governor out here some years ago, prior to 9/11. He's as a spokesperson. Some people find him, a hero, and others find him kind of annoying. But the thing is, at least he's honest and will speak things genuinely. So that is, somehow to get that on the form. We will go to conferences or political debates sometimes and put these questions out in the political forum. It's not always very popular, but we did have a candidate who was running for office that really basically agreed that a new investigation should take place. So.
Wow, and that's very good. And when you can get those answers from certain people, those are the people that you want in Congress and to remember you. Even if they just engage in a conversation with you, they'll remember you later on. And so you'll already have that kind of background with them. And of course, folks, the easiest way to reach out to your congressman is to call C-SPAN when they are on. The phone numbers are all over the internet. Wait for your congressman to come on, or any congressman, any day you have a day off, and simply call in and ask your question. And the facts are out there at AE911truth.org for you to peruse before you pose that question, so you have it all in your head. Bruce, I want to thank you for coming on 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks so much, Andy, and good luck.
Thanks for listening. Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lights Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download this program at 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.